So the next thing we're going to talk about is restoration ecology, and this is chapter 10 in your book. So why do we need restoration? There have been a lot of ecosystems that have been destroyed, and for endangered ecosystems, we may need to bring some of them back. If ecosystems are severely degraded, they may have lost their resilience. This is common if ecosystems have disturbance, and if you'll remember, we talked about different kinds of disturbance, and there's some disturbance that ecosystems are adapted to, like frequent fires or flooding, things like that. But there may be other kinds of disturbances that ecosystems, or I guess the species, don't have adaptations to deal with. And they can't really recover as easily from. And that might be things like mining, overgrazing with ranching, some logging practices, not all of them for sure. And without action, it may take ecosystems a really long time to recover. And if we want them to recover fast than that, we need to help them along. And that's basically the process of restoration. There are a lot of different motivations for restoration. It includes protecting species, making things look better, recreation, strengthening ecosystem function, and reestablishment of ecosystem services. So the definition is the practice of restoring the species and ecosystems that occupied a site at some point in the past but were damaged or destroyed. Restoration ecology is the science of restoration. And restored areas can be integrated into networks of protected areas. So we talked about this multi-pronged approach where we have protected areas that we designate and that we might have strict rules for. We have conservation possibilities in areas outside of protected areas, and then we can also restore areas. And if we can combine all of these, hopefully we can make a robust network of functioning ecosystems that accommodate different species metapopulations and increase the resilience of the whole system. We also know that some degraded land has lost most of its economic value, so that may be another thing that people want to restore. So this is just an example. This is trout stream habitat, and on top you see this has been degraded by human activities. There's a ton of erosion. This isn't very good trout habitat any longer. There's not a lot of vegetation, so in the summer this water may heat up a lot, which trout do not like. And this is one that's been restored by installing fencing to keep cattle out. That helps with the erosion. They've planted native species and reinforced the stream banks with rocks. So that gets rid of the erosion, makes the stream cooler from the vegetation, makes sure there's rocks, like complex habitat for the fish to hide under. And so these are pictures that are from your textbook if you want to read about them some more. So ecological restoration can also be part of compensatory mitigation or biodiversity offsets. And this is when development destroys a site and a new site is created or restored as a way to compensate for the site that's destroyed somewhere else. This is a common thing used for wetlands. We have a United States national policy of no net loss for wetlands. And so it is required by law that if you destroy a wetland by when you build a parking lot or a road or a shopping center, you have to create another wetland somewhere else. The law does not state that it has to be the same kind of wetland or have the same function or the same types of biodiversity, but you do have to create another wetland to make up for it. Restoration is also related to older applied techniques like wetland creation, range management of overgrazed lands, facilitating tree planting. And sometimes these result in overly simplified ecosystems that may not have that resilience that ideally we want in a functioning ecosystem. So where should we start? The first and most important part about a restoration project is having clear goals. You need to know why you're restoring the site and what you want to see in the finished product. How do you know when you're done? So usually you want to restore some similar species composition and ecosystem function to some point that would have been there in the past, but you need to decide what that is. And that is somewhat up for debate. Some people are trying to restore things to what they were maybe 100 years ago. Some people want us to restore things to pre-European arrival to North America. You could be trying to create ecosystems that are comparable to function and species to a reference site. So a reference site might be an area nearby that has the species composition and ecosystem function that is the target. And so the idea would be that you could take measurements through your restoration on some things that you're interested in. It might be water quality or plant composition or something else, and then you would also take the same measurements each time point at a reference site and try to figure out when they start to be very similar, and that might help you figure out whether you've hit your target or not. You can also have unrestored areas that act as a negative reference site, and so with this, if you have measurements over time, you can get an idea of whether your restoration actions are improving the area faster than it would kind of change on its own. So it gives you an idea of whether your restoration practices are actually effective or not. You also need to do these site assessments. So we talked about this with other kinds of management, but having data really helps you understand where you are and whether you're doing a good job. And that might sound like common sense and really basic, but there are so many places that are managed without much data collection. There are so many sites that are restored without any information to show whether the techniques that they did are actually effective or not. But you want to make sure that the money you spend on restoration is well spent. So having that data is useful for figuring out how much these different practices are helping. And then, so we have clear goals, you do a site assessment, and then you need a plan for how you're going to achieve your goals. And so this is just a schematic that kind of shows some of those steps. So start with a goal, and with that, you need to evaluate non-ecological factors, so logistics, policies, and different resources you have, a realistic restoration objective. Given the available resources, what do you want to achieve with them? And then evaluating ecological factors, site history, physical conditions, what species live there, what are some important ecological processes. You create this plan. How are you going to do this? Do pre-project monitoring. So you want a baseline. You want to know if it's water, you might want to know if the water quality, what it's like before you start doing anything, what species are there before you start doing anything. This is like your baseline information, the pre-project monitoring. You implement your plan, and then you conduct more monitoring. And you'll remember we talked about adaptive management. Engage in adaptive management. The idea is that as you get more data to see how your plan is working, you want to reevaluate. If it's not working, what else could we try? And then collect more data and see if that's better. Similarly, you might also evaluate these ecological factors at multiple points in the project.